Story 1, Whispering Shadows, submitted by Sabrina. So there's this old library in my town that's seen better days. You know the type. Creaky wooden floors, dimly lit corners, and shelves that seem like they're holding secrets more than just books. I've always been drawn to the place, despite the stories floating around about the strange happenings. Anyway, this one time I had an encounter that made my skin crawl. It was a gloomy evening, rain tapping on the windows, and I had this urge to get lost in a good mystery novel. The library seemed like the perfect spot to indulge myself. I walked in. The doorbell jingled softly as I entered. There were a few other people scattered around, lost in their own worlds. I made my way to the mystery section, which happened to be tucked away at the far end of the library. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air itself was holding on to forgotten stories. I packed up a book and settled into one of the old armchairs, the creaking sound merging with the distant rumble of the thunder outside. I was so engrossed in the story that I didn't notice that the library was growing quieter. The other patrons had left, and I found myself alone, bathed in the soft glow of a flickering lamp. I tried to ignore the eerie feeling that was creeping up on me, blaming it on the thunderstorm outside. But then I heard it, a whisper. At first, it was barely audible, like the rustle of pages in a gentle breeze. I just convinced myself that it was just my imagination. But then it came again, unmistakably, a hushed voice, like someone trying to speak without being heard. My heart started to race as I scanned the empty rows of bookshelves, my eyes straining to catch any moment. I told myself it was just the wind, maybe a loose window pane somewhere. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The whispering grew more distinct, almost like it was circling around me. I stood up, clutching the book in my hand, ready to make a swift exit. As I walked down the aisle, the whispers seemed to follow me. I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences that didn't quite form coherent thoughts. It was as if a dozen conversations were happening all at once. Just out of reach, panic began to claw at the edges of my mind. I quickened my pace, desperate to exit that suffocating sensation. I finally reached the main hall of the library, hoping that being in a large space would somehow make the whispers fade. But they only grew louder, more urgent. It was like a chorus of secrets being unveiled, a canopy of voices trying to break through some invisible barrier. My heart was pounding so loud that I almost didn't hear the librarian's voice. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her kind eyes filled with concern. I nodded, unable to find my voice. She must have noticed the distress in my face, because she gently placed a hand on my shoulder and led me to a quieter corner. She told me that the library had a history, stories of lost souls and unresolved mysteries. She explained that sometimes, if you listen closely, you could hear the echoes of those who had been here before. As she spoke, the whispers began to recede, replaced by a strange sort of understanding. It was as if the library itself was trying to communicate with me, sharing fragments of its past. I still left that night with a sense of unease, but it was mixed with a strange fascination. The encounter had shaken me to my core, but it also ignited a curiosity to uncover the stories that lingered within those walls. Story 2, The Red Metallic Thing, submitted by Francesca. All right, so let me tell you about this crazy evening I had at the National Library. Yeah, the big one that everyone calls the National Library. Picture this. It's one of those evenings when the library is almost empty. the kind where you can almost hear the quiet humming of the books. So there I am, lost in my own little study bubble, nose deep in my notes. I guess time flew because when I finally looked up, it was just me in the silence. Seriously, it felt like someone had decided to call it a night without letting me in on the plan. But that's when things got weird. I started hearing this shuffling noise, like, you know, when you're trying to move something heavy, but it's scraping against the floor. That's what it sounded like. My eyes zoomed to this old book cabinet tucked away in the corner. It was one of those antique ones, probably older than my grandma. It was moving. Like, seriously moving. Not just a creak here and there. Naturally, curiosity got the best of me. I mean, who wouldn't want to know what the heck was going on? So, I walk over to this cabinet, and I realize it's locked up tight. Bummer, right? But then, I see this little hole near the top, like the kind of hole you find in those peep show doors from old detective movies. I get down on my knees and peer through this hole, and guess what? I see this weird, shiny thing. It's red, like super bright red, almost like a shiny metallic ruby or something, but it's blocking whatever's inside the cabinet. I squint, try to get a better look, but it's just there, being all shiny and blocking the view. At this point, I figure it's some weird decoration or maybe a prank from the other students, so I go back to my studying, trying my best to ignore the oddness of the situation. But then, the noise starts up again. That scraping, shuffling noise. I look back at the cabinet, and now I'm convinced that something's up. I crawl back to the hole, heart pounding like crazy. And guess what? The shiny red thing is gone. Like completely gone. And now I'm starting to freak out a bit. I mean, what can make a shiny metallic thing vanish into thin air, right? I decided to tough it out. You know, I figure maybe I'm just tired and my mind is playing tricks on me. But the noise, it keeps coming back. It's like the cabinet is alive or something. And each time I look through that hole, the shiny thing is playing peekaboo. Sometimes there, sometimes not. The hours tick by and I'm getting more and more on edge. I try to focus on my books, but it's hard when every little creak or rustle sets me on edge. Finally, when I can't take it anymore, I pack up my stuff and head for the exit. As I'm leaving, I run into the guard, the friendly old guy who's always got a story to tell. So I spill the beans about the cabinet and the shiny thing and the noises. He just looks at me. His face is all serious. Then he drops this bomb on me. The cabinet isn't even from the library. It's some old thing they found and decided to keep. But here's the kicker. He starts talking about a witch. Yeah, a witch. Apparently a long time ago, they locked up this lady in that very cabinet. She was rumored to be some sort of witch, and she had these eyes that glowed like metallic red. They say they left her there to die, trapped in that cabinet. And you know the craziest part? I can't believe I was peeking directly into the eye of the witch. Story 3, The Enigmatic Librarian, submitted by Brian. Alright, so this happened a few years ago when I was still in high school. I used to be one of those kids who spent way too much time in the library, but not because I was a bookworm, but because it was a quiet place to do my homework and occasionally chat with my friends. One evening, I found myself in the library engrossed in my math assignment. The place was almost empty, just a few students scattered around, their noses buried in their books or laptops. The librarian, an elderly lady with silvery hair, was shoveling books in the corner, humming softly to herself. I was absorbed in my work when I noticed an odd sensation, like a cold breeze brushing up against the back of my neck. I shook it off, thinking maybe it was just the air conditioning acting up. But then I heard a faint whisper. It was so hushed that I could barely make out the words. I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. My gaze landed on the old lady sitting at one of the tables. Her eyes fixed on me, her lips moving. I couldn't quite understand what she was saying, but the chant seemed rhythmic and strangely familiar. My heart started racing, adrenaline coursing through me as her gaze locked into mine. She was smiling, not a warm smile, but kind of eerie grin that injected a sense of fear into my veins. I turned back to my math problems, trying to ignore her, but the whispering persisted, growing louder. With a shaky hand, I closed my textbook and gathered my things. I glanced at the old lady again, and she was still smiling at me, her lips forming those cryptic words. I couldn't take it anymore, so I quickly left the table and made my way toward the exit. As I walked towards the door, the whispers seemed to encircle me, their echoes seeping into my consciousness. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing rigid. It was like the words were insidiously embedding themselves under my skin, triggering an unease that I couldn't dispel. I approached the librarian, hoping for some sort of explanation or reassurance, but when I looked at her, her smile widened. The chanting grew even more intense. It was as if she was the very source of this unsettling whispers. My heart was pounding so hard it threatened to break free from my chest. I managed to mumble a quick "excuse me" and practically sprinted out of the library. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the whispers ceased. The air felt warmer, and I finally took a deep breath, attempting to calm my racing thoughts. Every time I thought about it, I could still hear those eerie whispers and see that old lady's unsettling smile. It took some time for me to gather the courage to go back, and when I did, everything was normal. The librarian was just an ordinary librarian, and there was no whispers, no chilling breeze, nothing out of the ordinary.